Alright, so today we are going to talk about probably one of my favorite absolute tech scandals in recent history, and that is the eBay stalking incident. Long story short, this is the story of a Natick couple in their 60s that ended up at the receiving end of a harassment campaign that was ordered by top eBay executives, including their CEO, allegedly. Everything I say in this video is all alleged, even though the court case has already been done and dealt with. Just for the sake of my own butt, we're going to say that this is all alleged. And I feel like this story is a really good example of a lot of the ego and hubris and self-importance that people can get when working in tech, especially working for one of the big tech companies, someone who has worked in tech themselves for quite a while. You know, this is something I have a lot of first-hand experience on, and I feel like this story is a pretty good way to kind of sum up what a lot of the space is like. David and Ina met in college in a very picturesque way. Ina at the time was a senior at North Adams College, and one day she decided to go to a house party that was being hosted by a local band. In that party, she saw David across the room, and they ended up, eventually talking, and they ended up talking all night, it turns out. A few evenings later, they ended up going on their first date. Years later, after the couple has already been, married and established, they found themselves going through a garage sale, something that was actually quite a big hobby of David's when he was growing up. They really reveled in the joy of finding someone's things that they were going to get rid of and finding a new purpose for it, or giving it a whole new life, so to speak. The simple exchange of buying something old off of someone. When eBay launched in 1995, David and Ina thought that this was a really intriguing and fantastic idea. They could relive the excitement that they felt when going to garage sales and basically seeing what hidden treasures that they could find. But now that they could do it, they could do this on a global scale. Anyone's treasures, anyone's trash around the world. But with this site and this technology being so new, David and Ina found that they didn't have a lot of people that they could talk to about how to navigate this new space and really kind of how to navigate what was essentially a brand new industry. But because of the lack of authority to look towards and the lack of authority in the space in regards to getting started in e-commerce, David and Ina decided to take it upon themselves. They decided to be the change that they wanted to see in the world. David and Ina created a business and a website that would help people get started in the world of online shopping. The couple called this site Auction Bites. Later, they changed it to e-commerce bites, which we're going to call it for the rest of the story. As their site grew, so did the depth of their journalism. Once they started tracking trends and policy updates across e-commerce, it soon became a resource for sellers and buyers alike. And not only was it a resource for buyers and sellers on eBay itself, but it also started attracting eyes from people that worked with or worked for Amazon, Etsy, and other up-and-coming e-commerce websites. Since the very beginning of the website, Ina was always the one who did the reporting and the journalism, because that was what her background was in, and David was the one in charge of the publishing and distribution. These two were able to run this business out of their home for over 10 years, and in that time, they were able to have over 600,000 people that were regular members of their site in one way or another. Of these 600,000 people, this actually included higher-ups at eBay, including a lot of their top executives. And with Ina and David getting their start in eBay, this actually ended up being kind of their bread and butter in regards to the reporting that they did as well. So with her reporting, especially talking about a lot of the in-depth and inside baseball stuff about eBay and how they operated, it's no surprise that she obviously ruffled a few feathers. Actually, a little bit more surprising, eBay would occasionally strike back with things that she said or did. In 2009, the Steiners had discovered that somebody leaving comments on their website, a lot of very negative stuff saying how the Steiners are hurting eBay sellers and basically making it harder for everyone else. Yeah, they found out that that person worked for eBay. They claimed that it was an eBay executive, but from the research that I did, this person wasn't really ousted. This targeted harassment didn't really stop there. Taking their pettiness to an extra level, eBay also decided to report e-commerce bites to their web host stating that the site was a phishing scam. And you gotta think about it like this. eBay, one of the largest websites in the world, says that your site is a phishing scam and hurting their customers. More often than not, the web host is going to take eBay's side and just instantly shut the whole thing down. But luckily for the Steiners, they were able to work with their web host, and eBay ended up recalling the complaint. eBay decided that retracting their complaint would be a lot easier than proving that this freaking old white couple in their 50s that live in Natick, Rhode Island, or wherever it is. I remember hearing Natick from an episode of Family Guy. That's how I know Natick. But anyways, eBay thought that these people were such a threat to their company that they basically false flagged them. And exactly as you would expect, in the years following this whole phishing scam, controversy scam, the relationship between the Steiners and eBay very quickly deteriorated. David and Ina, who once had a pretty open line of communication to like the PR department and stuff of eBay, occasionally being able to chat and exchange emails with, you know, some leaders and executives directly, they found that they were either getting ghosted, receiving vague answers, really delayed answers, or just straight up being brushed off. They realized very quickly they were no longer in eBay's good graces. While it sucks to be blacklisted, it didn't change the coverage. Ina kept going. Ina kept reporting about all the shenanigans eBay were up to, and she didn't really care whether or not that she was going to be able to get those lines of communication open with eBay again. You know, someone who went to school for communications and journalism, we stand. So as I previously mentioned, e-commerce sites, while it may not have been well known in, like, you know, the greater e-commerce sphere, it was still required reading for eBay executives. I mean, we're talking about like C-suite executives, top-level executives, things of that nature. In early 2019, Ina had shared that eBay had hired a new communications executive, a man by the name of Steve Weimer. Steve's direct report would be the CEO of eBay itself, Devin Winnig. Now, I would say that these two were basically just peas in a Wolf of Wall Street pod. Devin Winnig had spent most of his career in the East Coast financial media scene. So think like news articles, reports about people that are making big moves in finances or the financial sector, things of that nature. During his time before eBay, he spent his time as a lawyer and on the executive board at Thomson Reuters. Like Reuters, like when you're trying to actually source a legitimate news site and the only two places you can really cite are AP and Reuters, we're talking that Reuters. And also this man considered himself a New York alpha, so I mean, I think that really says like all you need to know there. And before working in tech and all this stuff in general, Steve had worked in the spin zone, or basically he worked in PR for 3 different Republican senators in Washington. 3, not the other one. Also, to get kind of another idea of how he views the world, I guess politically, but not getting into politics. In 2018, during the beginning of the Black Lives Matter. In 2018, during the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, Representative John Lewis, who, by the way, participated in the civil rights movement himself, made a tweet on Twitter, because X wasn't a thing back then, and he said, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, or a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good, necessary trouble." Which, I mean, that was 5 years ago, and I think those words still stand very strong today. But Steve, on the other hand, our boy Steve, he replied that he had, and I quote, "another view on how the USA should be governed. My view is equal to your view." His Twitter is currently locked down, and basically only people that he allows to follow him can follow him, so I can't find any additional context. I can't find the full quote itself right now. But I mean, if you can, leave it in the comments. In the media and online, Devin Winnig was a very loud and vocal proponent of eBay's 5 community values. And I mean, obviously this is basically just something that a lot of tech companies do. They have these grandiose values. Like everyone remembers Google famously saying, don't be evil, and then they got rid of don't be evil. And so yeah, but anyways, for eBay, their 5 values that they promote themselves on are: we believe people are basically good. We believe everybody has something to contribute. We believe that an honest, open environment can bring out the best in people. We recognize and respect everyone as a unique individual. We encourage you to treat others the way that you want to be treated. So their values are basically the same thing as an elementary school student. You would sign on the first day of school stating, I will be, a really good, well-behaved student. I will abide by our school's values of just not being a twerpy little kid. I can say that because I have 4 kids and I have seen young children, so I'm an authority on that. So anyways, yeah, Steve Weimer, Devin Winnig, 2 top-level eBay executives, and while in their public persona, a financial persona, or their persona is just money, they're out there spouting a lot of this golden rule type stuff, where they were trying to build an empire that was more in tune with the golden order, just righteous retribution for anyone who doesn't follow what they say. In April of 2019, Ina decided to write an article talking about the yearly salary of CEO Devin Winnig. She noted that his salary of that year was $18 million, which meant that it was about 152 times higher than that of the average corporate worker. She made an offhand remark stating how this overhead could basically be hurting eBay sellers, and they are the ones that are suffering these cost discrepancies. After the post went live, Steve saw it, sent it to Devin, and said, and I do quote, "We're going to crush this lady." I don't know if he said it exactly with that inflection, but Ina Steiner continued to break news about eBay's questionable purchases and money spending. She broke news on an on-campus pub that was added to eBay's headquarters. She also reported on a lot of inside baseball type thing, like organization restructuring, changes of leaders moving from one department or one team to another. This is a lot of stuff that if you actually do really care about your different tech companies or whatever, you're going to keep an eye on who's going in and out in the background. But no matter what she was reporting on, Devin Winnig basically found her existence just infuriating and excruciating. On May 31st of 2019, Ina had mentioned that Devin, in a public statement, said that he promised to give sellers more protection from fraudulent buyers. Steve Weimer found the link and said to Devin that, hey, this is shockingly reasonable. Trying to just kind of smooth a little ground. Then, Devin Winnig, CEO of eBay, a multi-billion international e-commerce company, replied to this article being shown to him with, "I couldn't care less what she says. Take her down." Now, to potentially understand why a multimillionaire would respond to a woman's newsletter who's in her 60s and just talks about eBay stuff, we should probably rewind a little bit to earlier that year, January of 2019. During that month, Elliot Management, an activist hedge fund, which if you don't know what that is, just hold on a second. Elliot Management, an activist hedge fund, purchased a significant investment in eBay, I think around 9 to 10% or so. They sent a letter to a board of its directors requesting a slew of changes, most notably of which included removing the CEO of eBay, Devin. This letter stated that eBay, as a public company investment, has underperformed both its peers and the market for a prolonged period of time. This was more or less placing additional demands on upper management to do the job that they felt like Devin Winnig couldn't do. Obviously, this led to a very large increased amount of stress around the office for everyone involved. This letter also noted that this opportunity with Elliot management could help eBay have their stock price go about $55 to $63 a share, which was a increase of like 75 to 100%, or double for those of you who can't do math. It basically said that if they followed everything Elliot management said and kicked out their CEO along with doing other changes, they could double their stock price. When INA decided to report on this letter, she led with the headline, "Activist Investor Eviscerates eBay Management." So here's my big short moment, so just imagine me sitting in like a bathtub or something if you'd like. So activist hedge funds and investors are basically people who buy stocks in companies with the full intention of detecting weaknesses and having them get patched up, no matter how much of a change they think it would cause. These changes are, of course, always with the end goal of improving the stock price and making everyone in the top of the company richer. For Elliot management, their signature tactic was what I just explained earlier. They would release a letter talking about everything that's wrong with the company, how Elliot could fix it, and more often than not, it needed to start with the resignation of either like the whole board of directors or the CEO. So just to note what level Elliot management is on in terms of like their global machinations. So one of the few unsuccessful campaigns that they ran was one time they tried to block an internal merger within Samsung, which is based out of South Korea. For those who don't know, Samsung is very much like what Amazon is trying to be. Like Samsung does healthcare, construction, insurance, pretty much a little bit of everything. So Elliot management decided to go in full offensive mode and kind of take their campaign to the media, just kind of highlighting how bad all these people were and how bad that this merger would be for, you know, people of Korea. The pressure from Elliot management got so high that the higher-ups, like the executives in Samsung, started going to government officials and bribing them to try to get them to quiet down Elliot management. So the drama and the fallout from this not only led to the imprisonment of Samsung's president, Park Geun-hye, they also they became so desperate, and like I said, they started bribing politicians and government officials. And in this whole fucking controversy, it came out that the president of South Korea at that time was involved in getting the money from those bribes. So basically, just trying to do a business, Elliot management managed to completely just destabilize the nation of South Korea for a little bit. So I think you can understand why the guy who ran the little eBay auction site was probably sweating some bullets right now. So to kind of summarize everything really quick from, you know, where we went, by 2019, Devin Winnig's basically he was already on the chopping block. People had grown frustrated of him running eBay, obviously with Elliot management, and also he was just basically internalizing a whole lot of God knows what with all the articles and stuff that INA was running from e-commerce bites. The whole thing just basically contributed to one man's paranoia and ego basically eating itself alive and causing him to do everything else that's about to happen. Like, this man was allegedly so far off the deep end that in email chains and text messages, he would, rant about e-commerce bites in INA and the Steiners to just colleagues and subordinates. And he would also complain about some random Twitter account called FIDOMASTER. There's lore. So while Devin and his crew were trying to make nice with Elliot, they were in no mood to hear that criticism leads to trouble, trouble leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, suffering leads to the dark side. Some critic just wouldn't shut their freaking mouth, and I mean, Devin and his boys would do it for them. So, at this point, he's gonna scare them silent. So, speaking of FIDOMASTER again, if there was one person Devin Winnig, CEO of eBay, hated more than the Steiners, it was FIDOMASTER. FIDOMASTER was literally just a random Twitter account that would basically just complain about eBay because his wife sold like just random stuff on eBay and he didn't think that she was getting the best experience possible. This man would be getting like 10 to 12 likes per tweet, but apparently he was complaining enough that he ended up under the eye, or I guess under the microscope, whatever, of eBay's global security and resilience team. This team, they kept a file on him, and that file contained every single piece of communication related to eBay in it. And that file got fat. So this global security team, global security and resilience, GSC, these are all names I'm probably going to just be sprinkling in for the rest of this video. The global security team consisted of dozens of people, which included retired police captains, former security consultants, people that had worked in like FBI, CIA, other three-letter agencies. And it was their main responsibility to track persons of interest. Meaning, basically, they kept a file on anyone that said that they didn't like eBay. And that way, if that person ever got too close to eBay's campus, they could call the real cops. These individuals that were filed upon by the eBay Global Security Team, they were also ranked in like a threat matrix. So, you know, basically, depending on the weather, their mood, whether they are a Capricorn or a Taurus, this would rate how big of a threat that they were to eBay at any given time. The head of this global security team, James Baugh, he would constantly cite the 2018 shooting at YouTube headquarters as the whole reason and existence of his team. His main conspiracy was that the Steiners and FIDOMASTER were somehow colluding to take down the whole eBay empire, just the three of them. He also floated the idea that FIDOMASTER might be a sock puppet account for the Steiners themselves. 8 days after Devin Winnig's take her down message, a member of the global security team actually flew to the Steiners' home, got on their property, and spray painted on their fence FIDOMASTER in all caps. They didn't spray paint in all caps, but the FIDOMASTER was in all caps. So from everything I've seen, eBay hasn't learned the name of FIDOMASTER, but I think that this level of paranoia and just unneeded and unprecedented action is obviously something that is a little bit of a habit, well, at least was a habit for Devin and Steve. So in mid-2019, FIDOMASTER got a DM one day from somebody named Marissa. They claimed that they were a 25-year-old, that they used to work for eBay, they were a disgruntled employee, and essentially she had videos of executives misbehaving badly, her quotes, and she was hoping that FIDOMASTER would be able to somehow help her get in contact with the Steiners. But as the two started talking about the footage and just kind of how that they could get them to the Steiners, it became clear to FIDOMASTER that he was trying to essentially be set up. This person was basically pushing to try to get them to admit that they somehow knew the Steiners directly and personally. FIDOMASTER would point out that the Steiners had public-facing emails, they had their own social accounts, they had numerous ways to get a hold of them. But Marissa decided that a better way to do this would be like this feels like something out of a political thriller from the 1990s, like some Manchurian Candidate nonsense or something like that. But she proposed that they meet up at any hotel of his choice, of FIDOMASTER's choice, and from there they would essentially do some sort of like spy did man's drop swap type of nonsense. So obviously FIDOMASTER declined this proposal, but Marissa just kept pushing to like meet in person, kept pushing to get in contact with the Steiners, and it just got to the point that FIDOMASTER just replied, if you want all this info so bad, get a lawyer. You would think that at this point, the fact that they couldn't even shake down a Twitter troll that they couldn't even identify, that maybe this full plan wasn't really worth it. So in order to kind of get an idea of what it was like inside the global security and resilience team, I think the best way to go about it would be through the eyes of Veronica Zay. She was one of the last people to join this team before everything went down, so she was in it. She was deep in it. So Veronica started out at eBay as an intelligence operator. She would pretty much just spend her days sitting in a windowless office right outside eBay's headquarters. And from there, she would just be spending her time watching CCTVs for any shenanigans going on or helping people that were locked out of their offices. Soon, she was promoted to intelligence analyst, and her job was to stay atop of any geopolitical or domestic threats that could be trouble for eBay. James Baugh and Stephanie Pop, his subordinate supervisor, they considered themselves a family, which if you ever hear that's a red flag. No, don't join that. Don't do that. James would often, for little to no reason, brag about how he used to work for the CIA and would often make claims that his wife was actually off on super secret CIA missions. One time, he allegedly found a knife on a barbecue grill while walking around campus. He took the knife and said that, quote unquote, someone deranged could really cause some damage with this type of thing. And then later he took the knife and proceeded to stab it into an office chair, and then he left it there just to prove a point. Apparently he said he wanted to keep it as a warning for the timid. So since Veronica never worked in a tech space before, she kind of assumed that this was all normal. And having worked in tech myself, yeah, you see a lot of things that are pretty much just considered normal. I mean, like one of the big ones is just like casual alcoholism. When I was working at Amazon, they had, little mini kegs and cubicles and stuff like that. And you could, grab a beer whenever you wanted and just chill and relax. I mean, obviously, if you know what it's like working in Amazon corporate, it's very obvious why they push stuff like that, but they normalize a lot of things that wouldn't be normal in any other type of company. So James, his team was no different to having some sort of weird tech company ritual or weird tech company habit. He would occasionally force all of his team to gather into a conference room, and he would essentially have them watch movie clips as kind of just like a way to be like, here's my lesson of the day. Here's something to kind of keep you motivated to remember what our real mission is. He showed a clip from the movie American Gangster, where Denzel Washington ends up just eliminating a person in the middle of the street, just, to kind of make a display and to kind of show his flex. He showed a clip from The Wolf of Wall Street where Jordan Belfort was being investigated by the feds, and him and all of his buddies were basically just, I don't remember, I don't recall. Who was that again? This was a type of mentality that he wanted between him and his subordinate employees. He was also a big fan of the movie Meet the Fockers, especially when Robert De Niro would always have the little line about having the CIA circle of trust. He would, always cap off conversations depending on slightly work-sensitive matters, and say, but this stays in the circle of trust, between you and me and my CIA buddies. As I previously stated earlier, Veronica and some of her other fellow employees were all contract workers. This means that they technically did not work for eBay. They worked for another company that eBay paid to have them work for them. Once again, very common in the tech space. While it's a good way to potentially get your name in there and kind of get your foot in the door, it's a double-edged sword because a lot of companies are really bad about, for lack of a better phrase, kind of taking advantage of contract workers. So obviously Veronica's ambition was to get converted full-time to work for eBay, and once again, one of the things about that is that one wrong move, one wrong step, one wrong remark, pissing off the wrong person can instantly crush a dream like that. So you constantly have to be on your toes, giving 110%, and basically making sure that you don't mess up, at all, in any way that could be perceived negatively. So with this anxiety in the back of her mind, she would be subjected to all these weird mafia-esque movie clips. She was subjected to constant drills. Drills would happen when it was least expected. James would come on the radio, say that there's a situation going on in Building 2 and force everyone to gear up and basically take action, which, in hindsight, whatever. There were usually about 6 fellow analysts on the team, but the turnover was very high, very much a rotating door. Veronica started to notice that over time, men were becoming more and more scarce. By May of 2018, the whole team was mainly women, along with like James and one other person. And James, being one of the few people who has more prep time than Batman, he actually had a clip to celebrate this occasion. He queued up a TED Talk by former Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg, where she gave a speech entitled, "Why We Have Too Few Women Leaders." So obviously James is like the most masculine feminist ever, and because of that, after this viewing, he dubbed his group James's Angels. And the one TV show clip that he used as kind of like his bottom line, his kind of signature, his, this is the manifesto of the GSR team. He would always pull up a clip from the show Billions. At least 5 times, Veronica can recall being made to watch this scene. In the scene in question, a billionaire sits and playfully demeans one of his subordinates when he found out that he was considering a job with a rival. The main part of the clip that James always seemed to accentuate is, you don't try to be loyal, you just are. And at the end of the day, that's what James wanted. It was loyalty. That was probably the most important tenet of the Global Security and Resilience team. And in August of 2019, Veronica's loyalty was put to the ultimate test, because her boss and her boss's boss and her boss's boss's boss, the CEO of eBay, a $28 billion company, told her that it was time to roll out. On August 1st of 2019, Ina wrote an article about a lawsuit between eBay and Amazon. The article itself and the lawsuit itself is not really that important. The article was just a basic overview of the case between Amazon and eBay, and it had a very mild note of skepticism regarding Devin Winnick's strategy in the long term, but this was enough to basically be the straw that broke the camel's back. 33 minutes after the e-commerce Bites article went up, Devin Winnick sent a text to Steve Weimer that said, "If you're ever going to take her down, now's the time." Steve Weimer responded, "On it." And then he proceeded to text James Baugh. And in this text, Steve Weimer, the son and grandson of a pastor, said, "Hatred is a sin, and I'm very sinful." Like, these guys thought that they were main characters, pretty much. The fact that they thought that they could say a line like that and didn't cringe, yeah, they got some main character syndrome going on. James Baugh replied, "Amen. I want her done." And Steve allegedly started this war with the cry of, "She is a biased troll who needs to be burned down." Around this time, Devin Winnick left for Italy to take a sabbatical. And basically by the time that he came back at, around September or so, he wanted all of this to be taken care of, and he wanted e-commerce Bites gone. So James Baugh started off the brainstorming session with what else? A movie watching party, or I guess more so a clip show. He started with the 1988 film Johnny Be Good, and the scene in question was essentially a grumpy old man opens the door and there's like a million people that are coming into his house. There's like some Hare Krishnas, there's like pizza people, there's like a plumber. You pretty much can understand the trope and get the gag. After viewing the clip, James asked for ideas and inspiration. No wrong answers here. No wrong answers. And somebody spoke up with the suggestion of sending them a coffin. No wrong answers. James made sure to make it abundantly clear that eBay's leadership supported whatever decisions that they decided to take going forward. He forwarded his team a message from Steve Weimer, and in this message, Steve took time to ponder and ruminate on the relationship between FIDOMASTER and the Steiners. He's quoted as saying, "I genuinely believe that these people are acting out of malice, and anything we can do to solve it must be explored." And he ended with his message with, "Whatever it takes." So this harassment campaign kind of unbungled itself over the course of a couple weeks in August. On August 7th, a Twitter account by the name of Tui Eli, or I probably completely mispronounced that, it's Samoan based. Anyways, Tui Eli sent a DM to the Steiners, and in this DM they were asking the Steiners what their problem with eBay was. They gave the profile just kind of a quick look over, and they couldn't really get much info out of it. The profile picture was something along the lines of like a skull. In regards to like their location, they said that they were based out of Somalia, so it wasn't really a lot to go on. But Tui Eli, once again, I'm sorry if I am butchering that, but Tui Eli had a bone to pick with the Steiners because they believed that their news coverage was hurting eBay sellers. Ina didn't respond to any of these messages, so Tui just kept antagonizing them, just spamming more messages, doing more and more crude language, being very uncouth about it, and Tui decided to end that night by saying, and I quote, "I guess I'm gonna have to get your attention another way, bitch." So yeah, in my head, it's like Joe Exotic. That bitch! On the morning of August 8th, 2019, one day before my birthday, they started receiving strange emails. The couple's inbox started overflowing with newsletters and emails from stuff that they never heard of, stuff that they never were interested in their life at all. They started getting emails from places like the Satanic Temple, place that promoted something called Sin City Fetish Night, making a note for later. They also started receiving emails for meetings of the Communist Party. Make that note for later. And something that is called, let me see here, cat fairies. This was just a small sample of apparently the dozens of newsletters that they were signed up for overnight. As the Steiners started waking up to all of this like newfound spam, they got another message from Tui Eli. And in this one, they were showing that they're pretty serious. They said, "When you hurt our business, you hurt our families. And people will do anything to protect their families." Just keep in mind that this spelling and grammar was very atypical of a Warhammer orc, so imagine that with like the accent. "When you hurt our business, you hurt our families. People do anything to protect family." Wog. On Steve Weimer's personal Twitter account, he was apparently at the time acting in full Finsona. One time he made a tweet about the Fred Rogers movie, kind of talking about how Mr. Rogers was such an inspiring figure in his life and how he tried to follow in his footsteps, and the movie just, made him cry. In fact, he felt so moved that he decided to retweet one of Mr. Rogers' tweets, stating, "If there's anything that bothers me, it's one person demeaning another." But on that very same day, Steve was sending messages to James in regards to updates on their little operation. He was quoted as saying, "I want to see ashes, as long as it takes whatever it takes." James ended up sharing this message with his deputy, David Harville, along with adding the note, "I've been ordered to find and destroy." These guys are so cool. God, I wish I could be them, but not go to jail. 3 days later, the Steiners ended up getting a very strange call. Somebody had called and left a voicemail saying that the Steiners had a wet specimen that they couldn't have delivered and they needed to come get it arranged to be picked up. Now, Ina called back the delivery service asking, first and foremost, what is a wet specimen? So the person on the other line told her that essentially what a wet specimen is some sort of organic material that has been transported in some sort of preservation liquid. Most commonly, stuff like body parts or anything like that being transferred via formaldehyde. And in this specific case, the wet specimen that was waiting for the Steiners was a pig fetus in formaldehyde. And in this exact moment, Ina realized that in having a just little newsletter about e-commerce and eBay, she somehow managed to piss off somebody so much it became personal. Ina told the police that she thought that whoever was behind this pig fetus was also probably behind the FIDOMASTER graffiti that I mentioned earlier in the story, which means that not only had this person found out the Steiners' address, but they had already been on their property and have already essentially violated their property. The cop took his notes, and on his way out the door, he handed the Steiners another package that was delivered to them from Amazon. The officer handed it to Ina as she went back to the kitchen to open it. Ina's husband, David, was chatting with the officer when they both heard an ear-piercing scream coming from the other room. They rush back and they see Ina just standing, looking at this open box, just completely blood-drained. The officer went over to look at the contents, and what he pulled out was a shrink-wrapped, blood-covered pig face. It turns out that this was actually just a mask, and it was one that was very reminiscent of like the pig mask from the Killer of the Saw movies. Couple that with the pig fetus, and I think you are kind of starting to see what they were starting to see. And actually 14 minutes later, Tui Ellie sent the Steiners a DM, and it was pretty much just straight to the point. Do I have your attention now? So in the following days, the Steiners were just bombarded with packages that were clearly antagonistic. They received a package that was full of larvae and spiders. David received a book on dealing with the loss of a spouse. One day, they received a box of live cockroaches, and Adam and Eve ended up getting in contact with them, like the Adam and Eve website for adult stuff. They ended up getting in contact with them because they said that they received an inquiry about working with them to start up a franchise. Which, hey, no shame there. I know that they sponsor a lot of YouTubers, so hey. So for 3 weeks, the packages and the threats, they both kept coming. Even though the Steiners had the help of the police on their side, they installed security cameras, they just couldn't figure out where this was all coming from. It got to the point where the Steiners had to start sleeping in separate rooms because if somebody broke in and started hurting one of them, at least the other could escape or call the police, which is just messed up to think about. On August 15th, the neighbors of the Steiners received copies of Barely Legal Hustlers, or Hustlers Barely Legal magazine. So they received those magazines, but on the name, it was addressed to David Steiner. So obviously making him look like a degenerate, and not the Wall Street Bets kind. And actually later that same day, their home was delivered a funeral wreath. Every time one of these deliveries hit their front door, shortly after, they would get some sort of threatening DM from Tui Ellie, which means that they were at least keeping well enough track on their emails and tracking numbers to be able to know when their, I don't even want to call them gifts, were being dropped off. On August 18th, a post appeared on Craigslist, a personal ad for a week-long block party. This pretty much was supposed to be an open buffet, a swingers party type of deal, but obviously this wasn't the Steiner scene. But this ad openly listed their address, just doxed them, and said stuff along the lines of, knock on the door, ring the bell, just come right in, anytime, day or night. We're just gonna be partying 24/7. That afternoon, Tui Ellie decided to dox the Steiners themselves on their Twitter account. And that afternoon, they got another message from Tui Ellie saying, "Did your C words get my gift?"
I'm right in the middle of something. Get rid of the C word.
I'll leave when I'm good and ready.
Few minutes later, there was another Craigslist ad, but this time it was a everything must go estate sale. And then an hour later, there was another ad with a, couples seeking couples for cross-dressing, BDSM, all the fun stuff that you kind of tend to get up to when you're an empty nester. At this point, The Steiners were able to get the Tui Ellie account completely just suspended from Twitter, but then just, like the Hydra itself, more just popped up in its place. This couple were afraid to be in their own house. They were afraid to be outside of their house, and I just couldn't imagine what it would be like just living that constant paranoia, thinking that you see someone following you, which is actually what happened to David. One day, David noticed that he was being followed around by a van. He actually tried to have them follow him to the police station, but once the van realized what was going on, they just, tailed out. Then he realized later that same day that he was being followed by a different sedan passenger vehicle. In his attempt to try to figure out, who it was, he actually managed to get a picture of their license plate. And this license plate number was the thing that they needed to start breaking this case. So now that we kind of have an idea of what the Steiners were experiencing during this time, we're going to just rewind back a little bit and let's talk about when the GSR team actually made it to Natick. So on the 15th of August, James Baugh and Veronica Zay decided to fly first class across the country. Late that night, they landed in Boston and decided to check in at the local Ritz-Carlton hotel. For those who don't know, the Ritz-Carlton is supposed to be a really, really fancy hotel. I wouldn't know, but it's also the origin of the song Put It on the Ritz from Young Frankenstein.
If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits?
After checking in, they met up with David Harville, the deputy that was mentioned earlier, and then they drove to the Steiners' home to try to plant a GPS device on their car. They were very confident in their ability to execute this plan because they had practiced beforehand. They found a similar car and they would use it in the eBay parking lot. So I think you have to imagine it like this. Imagine, you're leaving your eBay job where you're just basically being a code monkey all day. You're making good money, but is it really worth it in regards to the work-life balance? And as you're leaving, you see the security guards essentially running drills in a mix of hide and seek, and one of them trying to crawl under a car, shimmy under a car to try to plant a GPS device. And I always picture James out there with like a stopwatch or a timer or something, having all of his contractors try to see who could do it in the fastest time with other people pretending to be lookout and all that. I envision that he takes these drills very seriously, so he tries to make it as close to reality as possible. He's a man that cares about the details from what I've seen. So they finally get to the Steiners' house, they sneak onto the property, and they find out as they're getting ready to pull off this drill, everyone's in position, they were foiled by the oldest enemy of the goon. And that is just a locked door. The car was locked in the garage, so they couldn't get in. In response, David Harville, being the big brain that he is, he decided to just go to a local hardware store and get a pair of gloves and a crowbar with the intention of just busting it wide open. Luckily for him, he didn't, because that whole operation probably would have ended right then and there. So on the following day, James, Veronica, and David all decided that this would be a good day to start following the Steiners around. So they ended up following them in a passenger van. And as they were following the Steiners, they were actually listening in on a police radio via like the internet, one of those apps or something like that. And they found out that the police were being notified of the Steiners calling in saying that somebody's following them. So they ended up dipping out and just bailing. So basically, if you remember, this is when the Steiners started to get close to finding out who these people were. So after they dipped out, they decided that this would be a perfect time, get some food, get, some brain power going. They went to a local restaurant and racked up a $750 dinner bill while spending more time coming up with more harebrained schemes and ideas. Like, whatever they were drinking that night must have been some good stuff, because they had ideas that included deliveries of chainsaws, deliveries of human excrement, and just, the plain, simple, straight to the point dead rat. But because of the fact that, James, at the end of the day, he's a frugal man, he just ended up sending a 24/7 emergency plumber to their house that night. A lot easier, and, you can do that while completely sloshed. So after this, David Steiner returned to California, and he actually tagged out Stephanie Pop, the subordinate supervisor to James that I mentioned like way back in the beginning. We're part of a family. They actually call themselves mom and dad of the office, which is weird. Don't. Like, having office friends and all that is obviously like really good, and you can have some good lifelong friendships and connections from that. But if two people are calling themselves like mom and dad, that's just getting a little bit too weird, especially if they're married to other people. So yeah, with Stephanie coming in, they decided that this would be a good time to retry the surveillance and try tailing them again. But this time, they switched to a sedan. So yes, this was a car that David was able to get a picture of the license plate from. The fourth and final time that they decided to spend some time stalking out the Steiners, they noticed that there was a Jeep that was parked, off to the side. Big Jeep. All the windows completely tinted black. You could basically tell it was an undercover cop car. And they actually thought that this was a good sign, that they were spooking them that bad. James, getting high on his hubris, he ended up sending a WhatsApp message to his little group chat, and he said, quote, "That you're seeing ghosts now. Lol." So after that day, after David Steiner had gotten a picture of the license plate, handed it over to the detectives, handed it over to the police, they started, looking into it, trying to figure out who this was from. The investigator told Ina that he had ran the plates and it was from a rental. It's a start, but obviously that doesn't give them much to work with. But then he asked Ina a very important question. Basically, I would say would be the gunpowder trail to the rest of the kaboom, or the tiny domino to the big domino, pick your meme. But he said to Ina, "Do you know anyone named Veronica Zay?" She said, "No, who's that?" The detective replied to her, "Well, we aren't sure yet, but we can at least say that she works for eBay." Dun dun dun. With the name Veronica Zay, she had a perfect place to start to try to figure out what's been going on and why she's been targeted, her and her husband, in such a way. She started by searching for Veronica on LinkedIn. According to her LinkedIn profile at that time, it said that she was employed as a security officer in Las Vegas through a company called Progressive Force Concepts. And it also stated that her current assignment was at eBay's headquarters. So since all of this tomfoolery began, Ina had been doing everything that she could with the little information that she had to try to figure out who was behind this whole harassment campaign. Digging a little bit further, she started to cross-reference Veronica's contacts on LinkedIn with her mutual contacts that she has made during her 20-whatever years covering eBay and all the people who work there. In all that time, in 2 decades of covering eBay and its inner workings, never once had she ever heard of anything called a Global Security and Resilience Team. Ina was very confident in her knowledge, like she knew her stuff. But this GSR team was completely new to her, nothing she ever heard through the grapevine or even as a rumor. So, while obviously still completely shook, Ina actually did start to feel better, knowing that at the very least she could report this to eBay's higher-ups, and of course they would do the right thing, right? They would tell this employee to rein it in, because it's not like eBay told them to start this targeted campaign, right? So in that same frame of time, the police had traced back some of the gift cards that were used for some of the prank deliveries of pizzas. And from there, they were able to see that these gift cards were purchased a couple miles from eBay's headquarters. Since they already knew that Veronica was working as part of a eBay contracting team, they very, very quickly started to get these pieces put together. So on August 21st, 3 weeks after this all started. A detective showed up to the Ritz-Carlton in Boston looking for Veronica and wanting to speak with her. Somehow, Veronica was actually able to give him the slip, so, Janet Bourne, good for her. But in that same time, the detective called her phone, as a way to kind of confirm her identity, and what ended up happening was that James ended up picking up the phone, pretending to be Veronica's husband, acting all confused, being like, what ain't no country I ever heard of? Being a goon. Since Veronica's flight home wasn't for a few hours, they decided to get a hotel that was nearby the airport and just lay low for a little bit. James Baugh used this time to kind of keep himself grounded and focused. So, he went to his meditative habit of watching YouTube clips of old raunchy comedies from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. This time, he decided to put on loop a scene from the 2003 comedy Old School. And it's not even a whole scene. Apparently, it was just the clip of the husband-like person opening up the door, and then there was another guy who's waiting there. He's like, I'm here for the gangbang. Which, in hindsight, there was probably also the inspiration for a lot of those Craigslist ads. And he basically would just play this clip over and over, just laughing his ass off, telling Veronica that she just needed to lighten up. They were just going to fly back home in a few hours and everything would be peachy keen Avril Lavigne. They actually did make it home, though. Within several weeks of them landing, they started getting inquiries from the Natick Police Department, along with, other agencies, asking them for information, asking them for documents, texts, emails, all that fun stuff. So what does a good goon do during a moment of trial and tribulation? They all go onto an encrypted chat service and start deleting things en masse. So they went back to their group chat on WhatsApp so they could all get their stories straight. They could all make sure that they were all on the same page in regards to what has been deleted, what has been changed, who has been what, where, who, where, and why. During these conversations, they realized that the gift cards that they had used for the pizzas would end up being traced back to them. I don't know if they just, figured it out through former FBI logic, or if someone told them that they were caught through those gift cards. They knew that they had a very small window of time to come up with the perfect plan. So their multiversal brain level plan was to do this. Alright, so this plan was so stupid, I'm gonna have to kind of explain this in a little bit of a weird way. So as you should remember, hopefully, the GSR team, their whole job was to look for persons of interest. People that either had a grudge against eBay or somebody that could cause some type of harm that would make eBay look bad. With this information in mind, they started working on creating a person of interest that would somehow fit the personality and story of all the messages and harassment that they had been giving the Steiners. So to kind of just bring in everything that we've talked about here, Tui Ellie, the Samoan person on Twitter that was constantly sending stuff to the Steiners and harassing them. We also have Marissa as well, the 25-year-old that reached out to FIDOMASTER with quote-unquote compromising footage. And we also have whoever set up the delivery for the stuff like the pig fetus and the newsletters and the nudie mags. So in this group chat, they all colluded to basically invent a person that matched this description, and I kid you not, they were going to try to tie it to a real life person and hope that basically this person would take all the heat and go to jail on their behalf. But you have to remember, think about this as a whole story, the motivation behind all of this. This person had such a grudge with the Steiners that they did all of this on eBay's behalf. And despite the fact that they had a POI file on this person, they decided to not report it, and they just kind of let all this happen. And once again, all to make eBay look bad and to somehow bring them down from the inside. It just doesn't make sense because it's just so stupid. The GSR team also had fake dossiers made of the Steiners to show them as also another person of interest. So, fake threats, fake angry social media messages, fake everything. I wouldn't be surprised if they basically just took a whole bunch of their old files and other files of other persons of interest and just copied and pasted the Steiners picture like right onto it. And also, one of the members were quoted as saying that these dossiers were made to make the Steiners look crazy in front of the police and to basically try to brush off these rumors of harassment along with trying to pin it on someone else. Meanwhile, members of the security team started writing fake emails back and forth to each other to make it seem like that they had actually found the Tui Ellie Twitter account and started monitoring it and keeping action on it, so that way they could print out these emails, show it to the judge and say, hey, we were on this, despite the fact that, you know, these emails would have had to been made and sent to each other, you know, not hours before the feds come a-knocking. And the final piece of their basically tenant time loop reverse fight each other while fighting at the same time plan was to basically do what they called the white knight approach with the Steiners to try to get them to literally drop all of this. Brian Gilbert, one of the other people of the GSR team, would reach out to the Steiners and first off, you know, offer their condolences and apologize for all this, you know, terrible harassment that they've been getting. And, you know, while they haven't agreed on everything, they would love to do everything they could to offer their support. Basically stating, you know, if they just listened to whatever eBay said, they would make this whole problem go away. Which, just so you know, in other organized groups, this would be called extortion. Also, side note, I have a artist rendition of what this potential Samoan person of interest was supposed to look like. I will put it up here on screen. So, along with all of these other ways to discredit the Steiners and try to throw off the police, they also apparently considered reaching out to a good friend that they had in the Bay Area Police Department. And the plan from there, at least the thing that they spitballed or floated, was to have them send over falsified security cameras. Like, at this rate, they essentially just asked them to pull off the plot of Minority Report. Also, if I ended up spoiling one of the big plot moments of Minority Report, I'm sorry. The movie's like, what, 15 years old now? On August 22nd, Brian Gilbert, the one we previously mentioned, met with federal investigators. Apparently, they thought that they did a completely great job of outsmarting the DOJ and the FBI, along with several other police department detectives. But yeah, apparently once the feds made it abundantly clear the scope and depth of their investigation and just gave them a small sprinkle of what they already knew, all that confidence just flew out the window. On August 25th, looking for some high-level support, James Boss sent an email to Steve Weimer, for lack of a better phrase, I'm going to say begging and groveling for help. In this email, he told Steve that they had finished their OP operation with their friend in Boston. And on top of all of that, apparently the police had gotten wind of their op as well. He also told Steve that at this point, eBay's own lawyers were reaching out to James and the GSR team, wanting their questions answered and their files handed over. He was quoted with signing off his email with, "If there's any way to get some top cover on this, that would be great." Steve Weimer's response is unknown. I'm sorry, but once again, having worked in tech in the corporate world, that is the most corporate way to beg for someone to bail you out and basically save your life. Sir, it looks like the leopards have started eating our faces, and if I can get a little bit of top cover on this, that would really be appreciated. Thank you. Can we just get like 15 minutes later? Can I just borrow you for a quick 10 minutes? Remember that thing about loyalty that James was so, hyped about that I mentioned way in the beginning? Well, in hindsight, that was on full display. So when eBay's legal team interviewed Veronica Zay, they did it over speakerphone. But what they didn't know was that James and Stephanie were actually in the room with Veronica, feeding and guiding her answers. They have Veronica say that she was in Boston just for a conference. What kind of conference? Who knows? A business conference. She met up with Vincent and Daltman, and they had a business. After this interview, James instructed his entire team to wipe all of their phones and all of their devices, but by the end of that month, eBay's legal team had more than enough evidence to start placing members of the GSR team on administrative leave, including James himself. On September 18th, Veronica Zay got a message from her placement employer, Progressive Force. I want to keep saying Freedom Force. But anyways, they decided to let her know that her position had been terminated effective immediately. She was just flat out fired. She received no severance or any support of any kind. So on June 15th of 2020, nearly 1 year after all of this had began, the Steiners had received a call from a representative from the Department of Justice. They told them that in 15 minutes, the DOJ was going to announce the charges that stemmed from the entire investigation of this harassment campaign. When the FBI completed its investigation and made it public, Devin Winnick said in a statement, "There was no direction, no knowledge, no private understanding, no tacit approval. Ever." I was just speaking off the cuff. In a separate statement, Steve Weimer also stated that he would never participate nor condone or approve of any of the activities that were perpetrated against the Steiners. So of everyone that we talked about today, 5 former employees were charged but not arrested, and they all pled guilty to conspiracy to commit cyber stalking and conspiracy to tamper with witnesses. So these 5 were Stephanie Pop of San Jose, the mom of the group, second in command. Stephanie was sentenced to 13 months in prison. Stephanie Stockwell of Redwood City, California, who was one of the former managers of the team, so she had full knowledge of what was going on. She was sentenced to 24 months of probation. Veronica Zay, one of the main people we followed in this story, she actually probably got off the lightest. She only got 2 years of probation. First year was restricted to home confinement and had to pay a $5,000 fine. Brian Gilbert was sentenced to 18 months in a federal prison for each charge, and he had to serve both of them concurrently back to back. He was also fined $15,000 and forced to be supervised for 3 years following his release. On April 25th, 2022, James Baugh pled guilty. He pled to 1 count of conspiracy to commit stalking through interstate roads and interstate facilities, 2 counts of stalking through interstate travel, 2 counts of stalking through facilities of internet commerce, of interstate commerce, 2 counts of witness tampering, and 2 counts of destruction, altercation, and falsification of records in a federal investigation. James was sentenced to 57 months in prison, along with 2 years of supervised release, and was also made to pay a fine of $40,000. He probably got the worst punishment out of the bunch, and for good reason. On May 12th of 2022, David Harville also pled guilty to pretty much all the same charges. His fine was only $25,000, so I really don't feel like restating all of that. That's really hard to memorize. So with all that being said, let's see what happened to Devin and Steve. Representative for Devin said on his behalf, "People say things like that all the time, especially senior people in companies. It's not the same as I am knowingly joining a criminal conspiracy to cyberstalk a couple in Natick. People use loose talk like that all the time." So Devin Winnick resigned as CEO of eBay in September of 2019, and his punishment was an exit package of $57 million. In June of that following year, Devin was reelected to the board of General Motors. This position pays just, a modest $317,000 per year. The chief executive on this board said that the cyber stalking scandal was unfortunate, but it didn't have anything to do with GM's business or their profits. Now, she didn't say the thing about profits, but I mean, you can see where this is going. from everything that I have seen, Steve Weimer actually has a new job as well. He is the chief executive of the Boys and Girls Club of Silicon Valley. A chair representative for the Boys and Girls Club said that they were aware of Steve Weimer's past history, but they still believe that he was a man of value and a man of honor, and he was unanimously voted onto the board. Just what a punishment, my god. A tweet from the Boys and Girls Club of Silicon Valley when they announced that Steve was joining their team, they included the hashtag whatever it takes. That just feels almost like taunting at this point. Paul Florence, who was a chief executive at one of the staffing agencies that helped Veronica get into eBay, said this. It felt like eBay was breaking the analysts down psychologically, making them doubt themselves, isolating them, turning them against each other. And in the 18 months that his company worked with eBay, they fired over a dozen contractors. And when Paul tried to push back to eBay and, ask what's going on, why you guys just letting him go through the door like that, they ended up terminating the contract with Paul's company. When it was all said and done, he said, I was relieved. It seemed like a cult. If you've ever watched some of these cult videos on YouTube, this do-rag activity, but cult activity. So there you have it. Thank you for joining me on this very, very long ride. Alright, so that is where we are today. As of right now, that's all the information that I've been able to really dredge up. I think to me the story just really speaks to like this warped reality that people, it seems almost like not just, really, really rich and influential people, but like people that work in tech companies get to this level of success and they see this level amount of money that they don't even see people as people anymore. They just see them as like tools or pawns for their game. Like they thought that they were going to get away with this. They thought that this stupid plan would work. They thought that they could literally, like, 80s movies their way out of a cyber stalking charge using corporate emails. It's just stuff like that, and people that do completely stupid stuff like that just make it so infuriating about all the, like, wealth gaps in our country. Because, believe it or not, you don't have to be smart to be rich. You just gotta be lucky. But yeah, once again, thank you for spending like a good hour with me. I hope you got a lot of cleaning done. If you didn't, then that's okay. I hope you did something else that was fun. And yeah, for more weird internet stories like this, that's probably one of my favorite things to do, is just kind of talk about weird internet stories along with everything else. Yeah, just leave a comment, like, subscribe, do all the things. If there's any stories that are any instances, scandal stories, anything like this, you want me to talk about it, I'll definitely talk about it. I love researching weird things like this. And yeah, I've done that. I've been going, oh my god. And yeah, I've been going on for a while, been filming late nights, so I'm gonna wrap up here. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Thank you again. And yeah, thank you to, the hundreds of people that watch my videos. Honestly, I mean, it's a small number, but I'm glad people are watching and enjoying them. That's what it means to me. So thank you again. I hope to see you all soon. I really hope that I can get this to a point where I can at least start posting 2 videos a month. That's really what I want my goal to be. The bigger this gets, the easier it becomes to do. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. Thank you again. Have a great week. I'm going to try to get this posted before my birthday, which is in 2 days. Yeah, and so I guess I have to start rambling. So thank you again.